The visitor in the storm. The wind howled across the Arctic tundra like a wounded beast, rattling the reinforced windows of Research Station 7. I adjusted the thermal readings on my monitor, trying to focus on anything but the maddening isolation that came with being the station's winter caretaker. 3 months into my 6-month rotation, and the darkness had become my constant companion. My name is Thomas Hayes, and I never expected to become humanity's first contact with an alien civilization. But fate has a way of finding you, even at the edge of the world. The first warning came from my equipment. The seismic monitors began registering unusual vibrations, too regular to be natural, too intense to be from any known aircraft. I checked the external cameras, but the blizzard reduced visibility to mere meters. The vibrations grew stronger, and then, silence. The impact shook the entire station. Protocol dictated that I should radio for backup, but the storm had knocked out communications hours ago. I grabbed my emergency kit and thermal imaging equipment, fighting against my better judgment as I suited up for external conditions. Something had crashed less than a kilometer from the station, and if it was a human aircraft, every second could mean the difference between life and death for the crew. The moment I stepped outside, the wind nearly knocked me off my feet. The thermal imaging device showed nothing at first, just swirling snow and rocks. Then I saw it, a heat signature moving toward the station, stumbling through the snow. Too tall to be human, too graceful despite its apparent injury. I stood frozen as the figure emerged from the whiteout. It wore no protective gear despite the -40 degrees Celsius temperature, its silvery skin seeming to ripple in the harsh wind. Most striking were its eyes, 3 of them, arranged in a triangle, each glowing with an inner light that pulsed in rhythm with what I assumed was its heartbeat. The creature saw me and stopped. We stared at each other for what felt like eternity, 2 sentient beings meeting across the gulf of space, brought together by chance and catastrophe. Then its legs buckled, and I acted on instinct, rushing forward to catch it before it collapsed into the snow. Its skin was warm to the touch despite the cold, and I could feel tremors running through its body. "I've got you," I said, knowing it probably couldn't understand. "Let's get you inside." The alien was surprisingly light as I half-carried it back to the station. Once inside, I helped it to the medical bay, my training kicking in despite the surreal situation. It watched me with those luminous eyes as I gathered supplies, its head tilted in what seemed like curiosity. "Can you understand me?" I asked, preparing a thermal blanket. To my shock, it responded. Yes. The voice was neither male nor female, resonating with harmonics that made my skin tingle. "Your language. I learned, watching your transmissions." "I'm Thomas," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're hurt. Will you let me help?" I somehow knew now, nodded. "I am Nyara. My ship, the Storm." She winced, a hand going to her side where I could see a deep gash pulsing with silvery light. "Don't try to talk," I said, examining the wound. "We need to stop the bleeding first. I don't know your biology, but..." "Similar enough," she managed. "Your medicines will work." As I cleaned and dressed her wound, I couldn't help but wonder about the circumstances that brought her here. The crash couldn't have been an accident, not with how she kept glancing nervously at the windows, not with the way she flinched at every sound. "You're running from something," I said finally, securing the bandage. Nyara's eyes dimmed slightly. "Yes. Those who would enslave my people. They followed me here. I thought, your world was too far, too primitive for them to follow." I should have been offended at the primitive comment, but I was too busy processing the implications. "There are others coming." She nodded gravely. "They will not stop until they find me. I should leave." "You're not going anywhere in this condition," I interrupted, surprising myself with my vehemence. "The storm's getting worse, and you can barely stand. Whatever's coming, we'll deal with it together." Nyara studied me for a long moment, her eyes pulsing with an emotion I couldn't read. "Why would you help me? Our peoples have never met. I bring danger to your door." I thought about it as I finished securing her bandages. Because it's the right thing to do. Because if our situations were reversed, I'd hope someone would do the same for me. And because, I added with a slight smile, I've been alone up here for 3 months, and I could use the company. A sound emerged from her that might have been laughter, though it reminded me more of wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Your species is strange, Thomas Hayes. But perhaps that is not a bad thing." As if in response to her words, the station's proximity alarms began to wail. Something was approaching through the storm, something big. I looked at Nyara, saw the fear in her eyes, and made my decision. "Whatever's out there," I said, moving to secure the station's locks, "they'll have to get through me first." The night was just beginning, and I had a feeling it would be the longest of my life. Trust and survival. The proximity alarms continued their mournful wail as I rushed through emergency protocols, sealing off every entrance except the main airlock. Nyara had managed to stand, her silvery form casting strange shadows in the emergency lighting. "They're here," she whispered, her 3 eyes pulsing rapidly. "The harvester ships. They tracked my vessel's energy signature." I pulled up the external camera feeds on my monitors. Through the swirling snow, massive shapes descended from the clouds, 3 vessels that looked like angular predatory birds, their hulls gleaming with a dark metallic sheen that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Those are your pursuers?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "What exactly do they harvest?" Nyara's expression darkened. "Genetic material. Technology. Resources. Anything they deem useful. My people's ability to survive extreme environments made us particularly valuable to them." She turned to me, her eyes dimming. "I should surrender myself. They will destroy this facility, kill you without hesitation." "Not happening," I interrupted, pulling up the station systems on my terminal. Research Station 7 was built to withstand the worst the Arctic can throw at it. We've got backup generators, security systems, and enough supplies to last months. I paused, meeting her gaze. Besides, I'm not in the habit of turning over refugees to their persecutors. The station shuddered as one of the ships landed nearby, its massive form barely visible through the storm. Nyara moved to the window, her hand pressing against the reinforced glass. "You don't understand. The harvesters have technology far beyond anything on Earth. They..." She was cut off by a sound that made my blood run cold, a grinding, screeching noise from the outer walls. The temperature in the room suddenly dropped several degrees. "They're trying to breach the hull," I said, checking the readings. "Some kind of molecular disassembly." The wall itself seemed to be dissolving where their technology touched it. "We need weapons," Nyara said urgently. "Anything you have." I shook my head. "This is a research station, not a military base. We have flare guns, some tools." I trailed off, an idea forming. "But we do have something better. Knowledge." Moving quickly, I pulled up the station schematics. The facility's built in layers, with maintenance corridors between the walls. "And we have something they don't, we know exactly what's in here, including the hazardous materials storage." Nyara's eyes brightened with understanding. "We can use the environment against them." "Exactly. Plus, I've spent 3 months learning every quirk of this place's systems." I started typing rapidly, initiating emergency protocols I hoped I'd never have to use. "First, let's make it harder for them to find us." I killed the main power, plunging the station into darkness before the backup systems kicked in with minimal emergency lighting. The heating system shut down next. It would make things uncomfortable for us, but according to the thermal imaging, our visitors ran much hotter than either humans or Nyara's species. The grinding sound intensified, and I heard the crack of breaking glass from somewhere in the facility. They were inside. They'll have thermal imaging, Nyara warned, moving closer to me. They'll track our heat signatures. Already thought of that, I said, pulling open a maintenance panel. The station's water recycling system runs through every section. If I redirect it through the outer corridors. I typed in the commands, and the pipes groaned in protest. Hot water began circulating through the walls, creating a maze of heat signatures. That should confuse their sensors. Nyara made that wind chime sound again, her version of laughter, I was starting to realize. Clever. But they'll still find us eventually. Then we better have a plan ready when they do. I grabbed my tablet and emergency pack. Come on, we need to get to the lab. I have an idea, but I'll need your help. As we moved through the darkened corridors, I could hear them, heavy footsteps, mechanical whirring, and sounds that didn't belong in any earthly facility. The harvesters were methodically searching the station, and the dissolving effect of their technology was spreading. Your wounds, I whispered as we ducked into a maintenance shaft. How are they? Healing, she replied, her voice equally low. My species regenerates quickly. But Thomas. She caught my arm, her eyes pulsing with concern. If they capture you, death would be preferable. The experiments they conduct on new species. Not planning on either option, I said firmly. But I need to know, what weaknesses do they have? Every predator has one. Nyara was quiet for a moment as we climbed through the shaft. They rely heavily on their technology, their environmental suits. Without them, they cannot survive in most atmospheres. And they're hierarchical, each hunting party has a leader that coordinates their actions. I nodded, pieces of a plan coming together. Good. That's very good. We reached the lab, and I sealed the door behind us. Because I think I know how we can beat them. But you're not going to like it. Why not? Because, I said, pulling out the station's chemical inventory, we're going to have to let them catch us first. The sound of molecular disassembly grew closer as I began gathering supplies. We had minutes at most before the harvesters reached us. But sometimes, I thought, the best trap is the one your enemy walks into willingly. Nyara watched me work, her eyes reflecting the emergency lights like 3 silver moons. You're either brilliant or insane, she said finally. Probably both, I admitted, finishing my preparations. Survival at the edge of the world tends to require a bit of both. Ready? She nodded, moving into position as heavy footsteps approached our door. Ready. The door began to dissolve, and I took a deep breath. Everything depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Either my plan would work, or we'd both discover exactly how bad harvester hospitality could be. Somehow, I didn't think they'd be offering us tea. The maintenance tunnels beneath New Horizons mining complex were never meant to be navigated in darkness. Emergency lights cast intermittent pools of red illumination across rusted walkways, while distant explosions sent tremors through the metal walls. Thomas led the way, his knowledge of the complex their only advantage in this underground maze. Security checkpoint ahead, he whispered, consulting his tablet. Automated systems still active. Kyra moved like liquid shadow despite her injuries, her scaled skin adapting to match the darkness. Your mining colony's defenses are impressive for a civilian operation. New Horizon was built during the early days of the war, Thomas explained as they crouched behind a junction box. Paranoia runs deep out here. The security checkpoint loomed before them, a reinforced chamber with multiple scanning arrays. Getting through without triggering alarms would be impossible, and going around wasn't an option. The central archives lay directly beyond it. Kyra studied the system with professional interest. The scanner signatures, they're calibrated for human biology. They won't recognize my patterns correctly. Thomas caught her meaning. But they'll still detect an anomaly and trigger the alarm. Unless, she said, reaching for her modified translator, we give them something bigger to worry about. Before Thomas could protest, Kyra had removed the device's power core. With precise movements, she adjusted its frequency modulators and placed it near the checkpoint's main power conduit. The tiny device hummed with increasing intensity. "We have 3 minutes before it overloads," she announced. "The electromagnetic pulse will disable security systems across this entire level." Thomas stared at her. "You'll fry your translator. Without it. I've learned enough of your language." Her mandibles clicked in what he'd come to recognize as amusement. "Besides, actions speak louder than words, yes." The explosion above grew louder, accompanied by the distinctive whine of Zephalian dropships. Their time was running out. Thomas nodded, and they waited in tense silence as the translator's whine built to a crescendo. The pulse, when it came, was anticlimactic, a soft pop followed by cascading power failures throughout the tunnel system. Emergency lights flickered and died, plunging them into total darkness. The security checkpoint's barriers retracted as their systems failed. They moved swiftly through the disabled checkpoint, using Thomas's night vision monocular to navigate. The archive's entrance lay just ahead, a heavily reinforced door now reduced to its manual backup systems. "Hold," Kyra suddenly hissed, her enhanced senses picking up something Thomas couldn't detect. "We're not alone." The beam of a tactical light cut through the darkness behind them, followed by the sound of armored boots on metal grating. A human security team had descended into the tunnels, likely investigating the power failure. 2 more teams converging from the east tunnels, Kyra whispered, her natural ability to sense vibrations through solid surfaces proving invaluable. "And something else, different movement patterns. My people are here too." They pressed themselves into an alcove as the search parties drew closer. Through gaps in the maintenance grating above, they could see flashes of weapons fire. The battle on the surface was intensifying. "The archives have an old emergency exit," Thomas breathed, barely audible. "Maintenance shaft that leads to the secondary quarry. If we can reach it." A burst of gunfire interrupted him as one of the search teams opened fire on shadows further down the tunnel. The response came in the form of Zephalian pulse weapons, their distinctive blue energy bolts illuminating the space in strobing flashes. "They'll tear each other apart," Kyra observed, tension evident in her harmonics. "And us with them if we're caught." Thomas pulled out his mining charges, small explosives used for clearing rock falls. Time to remind everyone why these tunnels were abandoned in the first place. Understanding flickered across Kyra's features. The tunnels had been sealed off years ago due to instability. A few well-placed charges could trigger a controlled collapse, blocking pursuit without causing catastrophic damage. Working quickly, they set the charges at key structural points. The fighting drew closer, neither side aware they were being drawn into a trap. Thomas's knowledge of demolitions and Kyra's tactical experience made them an eerily effective team. "Charges set," Thomas announced. 30 seconds. They sprinted for the archive entrance. Behind them, the first security team rounded the corner just as the charges detonated. The controlled explosions sent vibrations through the tunnel network, followed by the groaning of overstressed metal and falling debris. Thomas heaved the manual release for the archive doors as dust and chaos erupted behind them. They slipped inside just as the tunnel collapsed, sealing them off from their pursuers, and their escape route. Inside the archives, emergency power still functioned, casting everything in dim blue light. Banks of servers hummed quietly, containing decades of mining colony records and data traffic. Somewhere in this digital labyrinth lay the proof they needed. "Well," Kyra said, studying the sealed door behind them, "it seems we've committed to this course of action." Thomas was already accessing a terminal. "The evidence is here, transmissions from the Kelvin 7 incident, unaltered by either side's propaganda. But we'll need a direct connection to both fleets to broadcast it. The mining colony's communication array? Too weak. But..." Thomas pulled up a schematic. "The quantum entanglement relay in the primary control center. It was installed to coordinate with deep space mining operations. If we can reach it, we can bypass normal communication channels entirely. Kyra's scales shifted to an intense purple, excitement or anticipation, Thomas had learned. Both fleets would receive the transmission simultaneously, with no way to block or intercept it. A distant boom rattled the archive's walls, followed by the sound of cutting tools. Their pursuers weren't giving up easily. "Download everything," Kyra urged, moving to guard the door. "We can find another way out, but this evidence must reach the surface." As Thomas worked to copy the crucial files, he glanced at his unlikely ally. Just days ago, they had been enemies. Now, they were perhaps the only hope of preventing another senseless escalation of a war built on misunderstanding. Through the walls, they could hear the sounds of both human and Zephalian forces trying to breach their sanctuary. Above, the battle for New Horizons skies continued to rage. They had the truth in their hands, but reaching the relay station meant crossing an active battlefield where both sides would shoot them on sight. "Ready," Thomas announced, securing the data module. Kyra's mandibles clicked in grim determination. "Then let us hope your human saying is true, Thomas Reed." "Which one?" "The truth shall set you free." She helped him pry open a maintenance duct. "Though perhaps they should have mentioned it could get you killed first." Hunters in the night. The lab door dissolved completely, revealing our pursuers for the first time. 3 harvesters stepped through the opening, their environmental suits making them look like biomechanical insects. Each was easily 8 feet tall, with multiple limbs ending in tools that could probably double as weapons. Their helmets were opaque, but I could feel their alien gazes studying us. The leader stepped forward, its voice coming through some kind of translator. "Subject Nyara, 379, your evasion ends here." The voice was artificially smooth, almost pleasant, which somehow made it more terrifying. "And a local specimen as well. Fortunate." I raised my hand slowly, playing my part. "Look, I don't want any trouble. I'm just a research station caretaker. Maybe we can talk about this." The leader's helmet tilted slightly. Unusual. Most species attempt violence at this stage. It turned to its companions. "Record the behavioral response. This specimen shows interesting cognitive patterns." "The human is irrelevant," Nyara said, her voice tight. "I am your target. Let them live, and I will cooperate fully." I had to admire her acting. If I hadn't known about our plan, I would have believed her completely. "Your bargaining position is non-existent," the leader replied. "Both specimens will be collected. Prepare for processing." One of the other harvesters moved forward, raising a device that looked uncomfortably like a medical instrument designed by someone with no concept of medical ethics. That was my cue. "Just one question first," I said quickly. "I'm curious about your environmental suits. They keep you alive in hostile atmospheres, right? Must be complicated systems. Lots of filters." The leader's posture changed subtly. "Your curiosity will be noted in the examination records. Proceed with." I slammed my hand down on the lab bench, triggering the charges I'd rigged. Chemical containers exploded across the room, releasing their contents into the air. At the same instant, Nyara threw herself at the ventilation controls, maxing out the air circulation. The reaction was immediate. The harvesters' suits began to corrode as the chemical cocktail I'd prepared, a mixture of the station's strongest acids and bases, ate through their protective layers. They stumbled back, their mechanical grace replaced by panic. "Emergency protocols," the leader shouted. "Seal breaches." "That won't work," I said, pulling on my own protective mask. "The chemicals are designed to become more reactive when they interact with your suit materials. The more you try to seal the breaches, the faster they'll spread." Nyara had already moved to block their retreat, her recovered strength evident in her fluid movements. "Your suits are compromising. You have one chance. Retreat to your ships and leave this world, or face atmospheric exposure. The two subordinate harvesters looked to their leader, their movements becoming increasingly erratic as their suits continued to degrade. The leader's helmet turned toward me. You understand our weakness. Impossible. Your species is primitive. You'd be surprised what humans can figure out, I replied. We're pretty good at improvising. And we have a talent for turning others' strengths into weaknesses. As if to emphasize my point, one of the subordinate suits began to fail catastrophically, its atmospheric seals rupturing. The harvester made a sound I never want to hear again and stumbled toward the exit. Retreat, the leader commanded. Return to ships. Mark this facility for orbital strike. I wouldn't, Nyara said calmly. My ship's core is still active. Strike this facility, and the resulting reaction will destroy everything within 50 kilometers, including your vessels. It was a bluff, her ship was damaged beyond any chance of explosion, but the harvesters couldn't know that. They backed away, their movements now purely focused on survival. This is not concluded, the leader said. Other teams will come. Maybe, I acknowledged. But they'll find us better prepared. And word will spread about what happened to the first team that tried. We watched as they retreated, their once intimidating forms now scrambling awkwardly through the dissolving doorway. Through the station's cameras, I tracked them returning to their ships. Minutes later, the massive vessels lifted off, quickly disappearing into the storm. When they were gone, I slumped against the lab bench, the adrenaline crash hitting me hard. That, actually worked. Nyara moved to help me up, her eyes pulsing with what I now recognized as concern. You took an enormous risk. If your calculations had been wrong, if they had attacked instead of retreating. Sometimes you have to gamble everything on understanding your opponent, I said. They're so dependent on their technology, so convinced of their superiority, that they never considered we might be able to turn it against them. Pride is a weakness too. She made her wind chime laugh. You humans are remarkable. I knew you were capable of violence, of creativity, but this, to defeat them without a single shot fired. Well, don't celebrate too much, I said, looking around at the partially dissolved lab. They'll be back, probably with countermeasures for this trick. And I'm running out of chemicals to throw at them. Nyara's expression became serious. Then we must prepare. I can help you modify your facility's defenses with what I know of their technology. If they return. When they return, I corrected. And yes, we'll need every advantage we can get. I checked the station systems on my tablet. The storm's getting worse. We should have at least a few days before they can safely approach again. A few days to prepare for an army of advanced alien hunters. Nyara's eyes pulsed with something like amusement. What you humans called impossible odds. I grinned despite my exhaustion. Actually, I'd call it Tuesday. Now, let's see what else we can cook up in this lab. I've always wanted to try some xenobiological chemistry. The maintenance duct emerged into chaos. The battle for New Horizon had escalated from orbital skirmish to full-scale ground assault. Zephalian dropships engaged with human defense turrets while troops from both sides clashed in the streets of the mining colony. The quantum entanglement relay stood at the heart of it all, housed in the central control tower that now served as a makeshift command center for the human forces. Thomas and Kyra crouched behind a fallen communications array, surveying the battlefield before them. The data module felt heavy in Thomas's pocket, so much hope contained in such a small device. Your people are using standard assault formations, Kyra observed, her military training evident in her analysis. They don't realize the Zephalian ground forces are herding them into a trap. And your people don't know about the automated defense grid hidden in those civilian buildings, Thomas countered. This whole thing is about to become a bloodbath unless we reach that relay. A massive explosion lit up the night sky as a Zephalian cruiser's weapons found their mark, destroying one of the colony's main power stations. Emergency systems kicked in, bathing everything in pulsing red light. "The defense grid will be running on backup power now," Thomas said, checking his tablet. "Limited functionality for the next 10 minutes before auxiliary generators kick in." "That's our window." Kyra's scales shifted to deep crimson, combat readiness. "The maintenance tunnels we mapped earlier connect to the tower's sublevels. If we time this right, we can use the chaos of the battle as cover." Thomas pulled up the schematics one last time. "But once we start broadcasting, both sides will trace the signal. We'll have minutes at best before they converge on our position. Then we make those minutes count." Kyra checked her salvaged pulse pistol, their one piece of functional alien technology. "Ready?" Thomas nodded, and they began their final push. The battle provided perfect cover as they moved from shadow to shadow, neither side expecting anyone to be moving toward the center of the conflict. They reached the maintenance tunnel entrance just as another explosion rocked the colony. The tunnels were mercifully empty, all security forces had been pulled to defend against the Zephalian assault. They moved swiftly through the darkness, guided by Thomas's knowledge of the complex and Kyra's enhanced senses. "Wait," Kyra suddenly hissed, pressing them against a wall. Heavy footsteps echoed through the tunnel ahead, accompanied by voices. "Can't risk them reaching the command center," someone was saying. "If the Zephalians capture our communication systems." "Understood, Commander. Security teams are doing a final sweep now. If anyone's down here, we'll find them." Thomas recognized the voice, Commander Hayes, the colony's head of security. The footsteps drew closer, accompanied by the hum of active scanning equipment. Kyra's grip tightened on her weapon, but Thomas shook his head. They couldn't risk giving away their position, not when they were so close. Instead, he pointed to a maintenance shaft above them, barely large enough for them to squeeze through. They pulled themselves up just as the security team rounded the corner. Through gaps in the shaft's grating, they watched as Hayes and his team passed directly beneath them. One of the scanners beeped, and everyone froze. "Sir, getting some unusual readings," a technician reported. "Could be interference from the battle, but—" Hayes raised his hand for silence, studying the tunnel carefully. Thomas held his breath, acutely aware of how the slightest movement would give them away. A massive impact shook the entire complex, sending dust cascading through the tunnels. Hayes's radio crackled to life with urgent reports of Zephalian forces breaching the outer defenses. "No time for ghost hunting," Hayes ordered. "Get to your positions. We're about to have company." The security team double-timed it toward the surface, leaving Thomas and Kyra alone in their precarious hiding spot. They waited until the footsteps faded before dropping back to the tunnel floor. "That was too close," Thomas breathed. "It's about to get closer." Kyra pointed ahead. "The relay control room is just above us, but listen." Thomas could hear it now, the sounds of combat from above. The Zephalian assault had reached the tower. They were out of time. They found the access ladder to the relay control room and climbed quickly, emerging into a scene of controlled chaos. Technical staff rushed to secure systems while security teams fortified positions. Through the armored windows, they could see Zephalian dropships engaging with the tower's remaining defenses. "The relay terminal is there," Thomas pointed to a heavily shielded console across the room. "But we'll never reach it without being seen." Kyra studied the situation, her military mind working through scenarios. "Perhaps it's time we stopped hiding." Before Thomas could respond, she stepped out of cover, weapon held high above her head in a clear gesture of surrender. The reaction was immediate, every human weapon in the room trained on her while technicians scrambled for cover. "Hold your fire." Thomas emerged beside her, hands raised. "We have proof that this entire war is based on a lie, and we need to broadcast it now before more people die. Read." Commander Hayes stepped forward, his own weapon unwavering. I knew something was wrong when you disappeared after that crash. Consorting with the enemy, you know the penalty for treason. If I'm wrong, you can execute me yourself, Thomas replied. But first, look at this data. 15 minutes, that's all we're asking. 15 minutes to prevent another 20 years of pointless war. A direct hit rocked the tower, and warning klaxons blared throughout the complex. The Zephalian assault was entering its final phase. Hayes looked from Thomas to Kyra, then at the battles raging outside. In that moment of decision, the fate of two species hung in the balance. 15 minutes, Hayes finally growled. And if you're lying, I'll throw you both off this tower myself. They rushed to the relay terminal, aware that time was running out. As Thomas began the data transfer, Kyra moved to the windows, watching as her people pressed their attack. Everything hinged on what would happen in the next few minutes. Transfer initiated, Thomas announced. Broadcasting on all frequencies, quantum locked to prevent interference. Both fleets will receive it simultaneously. The first signs that the transmission was having an effect came quickly. The Zephalian attacks began to slow, then pause entirely. Human defensive fire likewise decreased as commanders on both sides processed the information they were receiving. But they weren't done yet. The hardest part still lay ahead, convincing generations of soldiers and leaders to look past their hatred and see the truth that had been hidden from them all. Sanctuary under siege. 5 days after our first encounter with the harvesters, I learned that having an alien for a roommate could be surprisingly normal. Nyara proved to be both a quick study of human technology and an engaging companion. She helped me repair the damage to the station while sharing stories about her people, a species of explorers and scientists who had attracted the wrong kind of attention from the harvesters. Your barrier is ready, she announced, finishing the modifications to the station's outer walls. Using salvaged parts from her ship, we'd created an electromagnetic shield that would theoretically disrupt the harvester's molecular disassembly technology. I looked up from my own work, a series of automated drones rigged with chemical sprayers. Good timing. The storm's starting to clear. Nyara moved to the window, her silvery skin reflecting the first rays of sun we'd seen in days. They'll come at dawn. It's their preferred attack time. The atmospheric conditions will be optimal for their ships. Then we have about 6 hours. I checked our defenses one last time. How are you holding up? She turned to face me, her 3 eyes pulsing softly. I should be asking you that question. This is not your fight, Thomas. It became my fight when they threatened my station. I paused, meeting her gaze. And when they threatened my friend. The word hung between us for a moment. Nyara's eyes flickered with an emotion I couldn't quite read. Friend, she repeated softly. Your species forms attachments quickly. Life's too short not to, I replied with a shrug. Especially when. The proximity alarm cut me off. I rushed to the monitors, Nyara close behind me. The readings made my heart sink. That's not possible, I whispered. There are 15 ships out there. The first group only had 3. They brought a harvesting fleet, Nyara said grimly. They mean to take this entire facility, strip it for anything useful. Your defense against their suits impressed them, now they want your technology, your knowledge. I watched as the ships descended through the clearing sky, their dark forms blotting out the stars. Well, they're going to have to work for it. Time to see if our preparations pay off. The first attack came from above. The harvesters had learned from their previous encounter, instead of entering directly, they began cutting through the roof with some kind of energy beam. But we were ready. Activating electromagnetic barrier, Nyara called out, her hands dancing over the modified controls. The shield hummed to life, and the energy beams scattered harmlessly across its surface. They'll try to overload it, I warned, launching our defensive drones. That's what I would do. As if on cue, multiple beams converged on a single point of the shield. The power readings spiked dangerously. Rerouting power from non-essential systems, Nyara responded. But we can't maintain this indefinitely. I nodded, directing the drones to strategic positions. We don't have to. We just need to make taking this facility cost more than it's worth. The harvesters shifted tactics, landing troops around the perimeter of the station. Their new environmental suits looked heavier, probably designed to resist our chemical weapons. But that just meant they'd move slower. Here they come, I muttered, watching them advance through the snow. Let's show them some Earth hospitality. I triggered the first line of defense, automated turrets we'd fabricated using parts from Nyara's ship, loaded with a compound she'd helped me synthesize. The liquid splashed across the harvester's new suits, and for a moment nothing happened. Then the suits began to crystallize. The compound reacts with their suit material, Nyara explained, a note of satisfaction in her voice. Transforms it into a brittle crystal structure. They can break free, but it slows them down and damages their protection, I finished. And they have to keep coming through it to reach us. The harvester's advance slowed to a crawl as they struggled through our defensive lines. Each step forward cost them more suit integrity, more time exposed to the brutal Arctic conditions. But they kept coming. Thomas, Nyara said suddenly, her voice tense. Look at their formation. I studied the tactical display and felt my blood run cold. The harvesters weren't trying to break through our defenses, they were hurting us. Each apparent attack was actually pushing us to concentrate our defenses in specific areas, leaving others vulnerable. They're corralling us, I realized. Like cattle. This isn't an assault, it's a roundup. As if to confirm my words, new readings appeared on our sensors. Something was tunneling under the station, bypassing our surface defenses entirely. They're using our own tactics against us, Nyara said. Learning, adapting. This is why they're so dangerous. The floor trembled beneath our feet. We had minutes, maybe less, before they breached from below. Fall back to the core lab, I ordered, grabbing our emergency packs. We planned for this. Nyara hesitated. Thomas, the final defense protocol. If we use it. I know. I met her gaze steadily. The station won't survive. But neither will they. She nodded once, understanding the weight of what we were about to do. We'd rigged the station's nuclear power core to overload if necessary, turning the entire facility into a trap. It would mean destroying my home of 3 years, but better that than letting the harvesters take it. As we ran through the corridors, sealing bulkheads behind us, I couldn't help but wonder if this was how it would end, making a last stand in an Arctic research station with an alien ally against an army of interstellar hunters. Then again, I thought as we reached the core lab and began the final preparations, there were worse ways to go out than saving a friend and giving the harvesters a lesson they'd never forget. The floor began to crack beneath us, and I heard the sound of molecular disassembly from multiple directions. Our time was up. Ready? I asked Nyara, my hand hovering over the override controls. Her eyes pulsed with determination. Ready. But Thomas, thank you. For everything. Thank me when we survive this, I replied, and began the sequence that would either save us or end everything in nuclear fire. In the tense silence that followed the broadcast, New Horizon held its breath. The relay control room had become eerily quiet, with only the hum of equipment and the distant sounds of powered-down weapons breaking the stillness. Through the armored windows, they could see Zephalian ships hanging motionless in the sky, their weapon systems powered down but not disabled, a gesture of pause rather than surrender. Thomas stood at the relay terminal, watching as confirmation signals indicated the data's successful transmission to both fleets. Beside him, Kyra's scales had taken on a shifting pattern of deep blues and purples, emotions too complex for human understanding. Incoming transmission, a technician announced. Multiple sources, both human and Zephalian frequencies. Commander Hayes moved to the main communication console, his expression guarded. Put them through. All of them. The screens came alive with faces from both species, human admirals and Zephalian war chiefs, colonial governors and clan leaders. Their expressions ranged from shock to disbelief to barely contained rage. These records, a Zephalian high commander spoke first, his translator rendering his harmonics into clipped tones, they cannot be authentic. They are. Kyra stepped forward, addressing her superior directly in their native tongue. I have seen the original data streams, verified the quantum signatures myself. The Kelvin 7 incident was a mining accident, not a human attack. Our response, our entire war, was based on a misunderstanding. A convenient explanation, a human admiral scoffed. And we're supposed to trust the word of a traitor and an alien? Trust the evidence, Thomas countered. The timestamps, the radiation signatures, the emergency transmissions, they all confirm what really happened. Both sides were so ready to believe the worst of each other that we never stopped to question the narrative. The debate that followed was heated, with 20 years of hatred and suspicion not easily set aside. But as more leaders reviewed the data, as more experts confirmed its authenticity, the tone began to shift. Questions turned from accusations to genuine inquiry. How had this happened? How had both sides missed the truth for so long? The real question, Hayes interjected, surprising everyone, is what we do now. A thoughtful silence fell over the assembled leaders. It was a Zephalian elder who spoke next, her age evident in the faded patterns of her scales. On my world, she said slowly, there is an ancient ceremony for acknowledging great wrongs and beginning anew. We call it the harmony of understanding. Perhaps it is time for both our peoples to learn this ritual. The human colonial governor nodded. New Horizon could host the initial diplomatic talks. It seems fitting, given what's happened here. As the leaders continued their discussion, now focused on the mechanics of peace rather than the prosecution of war, Thomas felt Kyra touch his arm. They're actually listening, she said softly. After all this time, they're finally listening. Sometimes the truth just needs the right moment, Thomas replied. And the right people to speak it. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Forces from both sides began standing down, with weapons powered down but not yet put away. Trust would take time to build. Medical teams from both species began treating the wounded together, discovering in their shared work that their differences were not as vast as they had believed. As the sun rose over New Horizon, it illuminated a changed world. Zephalian ships now landed as guests rather than invaders. Human defense systems remained active but untargeted. It was a fragile peace, born in the chaos of near destruction, but it was peace nonetheless. In the colony's main conference room, Thomas and Kyra sat before a joint military tribunal, their actions under review. They had violated numerous regulations and laws on both sides, and there would be consequences. But as they presented their testimony, it became clear that their actions had sparked something greater than themselves. Your methods were unorthodox, the tribunal leader concluded, but your results are undeniable. Both our peoples owe you a debt that cannot easily be repaid. We don't want repayment, Thomas said, glancing at Kyra. We want change. Real, lasting change. The tribunal's decision was unprecedented. Rather than punishment, they were appointed as joint liaisons to the newly formed Human Zephalian Reconciliation Commission. Their unique partnership would serve as a bridge between worlds, helping both species navigate the challenging path ahead. Weeks later, Thomas stood on an observation platform overlooking the colony. The signs of battle were still visible, but now mixed with signs of reconstruction, human and Zephalian crews working side by side to rebuild what had been broken. Kyra joined him, her scales now showing the calm patterns of contentment. The first diplomatic delegation arrives tomorrow, she said. Many still doubt this peace will last. It will last if we make it last, Thomas replied. One day at a time, one person at a time. Is that human optimism speaking? No, he smiled. It's human stubbornness. Once we decide to do something, we tend to see it through. In that, our peoples are not so different. Kyra looked out at the horizon, where the first stars were becoming visible. My people have a saying, the longest journey begins with a single step, but it is the second step that proves the journey has truly begun. And what's the third step? The third step, she turned to face him, is walking that path together, no matter how difficult it becomes. Below them, New Horizon continued its transformation from battlefield to bridge between worlds. The war that had begun with a misunderstanding was ending with understanding. It wasn't a perfect ending, there would be challenges ahead, doubts to overcome, and trust to rebuild. But it was a beginning, and sometimes, that was enough. As the stars emerged fully in the darkening sky, Thomas and Kyra remained at their post, two former enemies now guardians of a fragile peace. They had started their journey as soldiers of opposing sides but would continue it as architects of reconciliation, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal when truth and understanding lit the way. The story of New Horizon would be told for generations to come, not as a tale of war, but as a reminder that the greatest victories often come not from defeating an enemy, but from turning an enemy into a friend. In the end, it wasn't weapons or armies that had changed the course of history, but the simple courage to look past differences and see the truth that had been there all along. Dawn of Understanding. Time seemed to slow as I initiated the core overload sequence. The harvesters were breaking through from multiple points now, their enhanced suits giving them confidence as they advanced. But there was something they didn't know, something that would change everything. Containment breach in 60 seconds, the station's computer announced calmly. The leader of the harvester force stepped forward, its new suit gleaming with protective layers. Your resistance ends now. Surrender, and your specimens will be preserved for study. I looked at Nyara, saw the slight nod she gave me, and smiled. Actually, I think it's time we showed you what human ingenuity and alien wisdom can accomplish together. Explain, the leader demanded, its translator making the word sound almost curious. You see, while you were preparing your second attack, we weren't just developing defenses. I gestured to the core behind us. We were learning from each other. Nyara taught me about your technology, your weaknesses. And I taught her something about human nature, specifically, our talent for misdirection. Nyara stepped forward, her silver skin beginning to glow with an inner light. Your arrogance blinds you. You think you understand what you're dealing with, but you don't even understand what you're seeing. The harvester's sensors must have started picking up unusual readings, because they suddenly shifted their stance to a more defensive position. The leader's helmet tilted, studying us more intently. The core, it said. You've modified it with technology from the refugee's ship. Better than that, I replied. We've modified everything. The whole station, every system, every defense we showed you, it was all a setup for this moment. The computer's voice echoed through the facility, containment breach in 30 seconds. The chemicals we used against your suits. Nyara continued. They weren't just weapons. They were preparing the environment, creating a matrix of reactive particles throughout the station. Particles that are now ready to receive a very specific energy signature. Understanding seemed to hit the harvesters all at once. They began to retreat, but it was too late. You pride yourselves on your advanced technology, I said, watching them realize their mistake. But sometimes the oldest tricks are the best ones. Like the Trojan horse, letting your enemy think they've won, right until the moment they realize they've walked into a trap. Core breach imminent, the computer announced. 10 seconds. The leader raised its weapon. You'll die too. This facility cannot withstand. We're not destroying the station, Nyara interrupted. We're transforming it. I slammed my hand down on the final control, and everything changed. The modified core released a pulse of energy that interacted with our carefully prepared chemical matrix. The reaction spread through the entire facility in seconds, creating what Nyara had called a phase shift bubble. The walls, the air, even the light seemed to ripple as reality itself bent around us. The harvesters' weapons and suits suddenly stopped working as the laws of physics inside the station shifted just enough to render their technology useless. But our hybrid systems, designed specifically for this altered state, continued functioning perfectly. "What have you done?" the leader demanded, its confident tone replaced by something close to fear. "Created a space where your technology can't exist," I explained. "A bubble of altered reality that will spread to your ships, rendering them inert. You can't harvest what you can't touch. And now," Nyara added, her voice carrying a note of triumph, "you're going to carry a message back to your people. This world, these humans, they are not primitive, and they are not prey. They are capable of things you cannot imagine, especially when they work together with others." The harvesters were retreating now, their mighty suits nothing more than elaborate cages in our transformed environment. Their ships, touched by the expanding phase shift, went dark and silent. "This effect will last long enough for Earth's authorities to arrive," I said. "Long enough for humanity to learn about the threats, and allies, that exist among the stars. Your time of operating in secret is over." The leader stood silent for a moment, then spoke in a different tone, one the translator struggled to convey. "We underestimated you. Both of you. That's the thing about humans," I replied. "We're at our best when faced with impossible odds. Especially when we have friends to help us overcome them." Over the next few hours, we watched as Earth's military responded to our emergency signals, arriving to find disabled alien ships and very confused harvesters. Nyara and I spent that time explaining what had happened, what existed out there in space, and how humanity needed to prepare. Later, as we stood watching the sunrise over the Arctic landscape, Nyara turned to me. "What will you do now? Your quiet life has become rather complicated." I laughed. Quiet was getting old anyway. Besides, Earth is going to need people who understand what's out there, who can help bridge the gap between worlds. I glanced at her. "Assuming you're planning to stick around?" Her eyes pulsed with that warm glow I'd come to recognize as happiness. "Someone needs to help your species avoid making the same mistakes mine did. And..." She paused, making that wind chime laugh I'd grown so fond of. "I find I've developed a certain appreciation for human company." "Good," I said, watching the golden light spread across the snow. "Because I think this is just the beginning of a much bigger adventure." The dawn painted the station in shades of pink and gold, its walls still shimmering slightly with the aftermath of our phase shift. Inside, humans and aliens were already beginning to work together, learning from each other, preparing for whatever might come next from the depths of space. But for that moment, we just stood there, a human and an alien, watching the sun rise on a new era of possibility. Sometimes, I reflected, the best stories begin when someone unexpected runs in from the cold, bringing with them challenges, friendship, and the chance to become something more than we ever imagined we could be.